book of Ruth, and today we're going to focus particularly on chapter 2. In our last session, I talked about how Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth were left on their own when their husbands died. Naomi suggested that both her daughters-in-law went back to their families so they could be looked after, or they could get remarried because they were young and widows. And Oprah decided to go back home, but Ruth chose to stay with Naomi. Ruth was from a different culture. She was a Moabitess. Her family and her people would have worshipped other gods, but she said, "Your God is my God and your people are my people." So she chose to worship Naomi's God, and she chose to stick with her mother-in-law and care for her and look after her. Ruth's attitude teaches us about the kind of faithfulness God really delights in. We read about this kind of faithfulness in the book of Micah. The very famous verses in chapter 6, verses 7 and 8 say, "What does God require of you? To act justly, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." And that's exactly what Ruth did. Ruth walked humbly with her God and humbly with Naomi. Naomi's name means pleasant. So in chapter 1, we read that when Ruth and Naomi went from Moab to Judah, because there was food in Judah, the people, all the women in town, acknowledged Naomi's presence and they knew who she was. And when they addressed her with her name, Naomi said, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara." Because she didn't want to be called pleasant, and Mara means bitter. She says in chapter 1, "I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty, meaning when she went from Judah, she was married, she was good, she had enough to live on, she was fine, but now she's got nothing. And she's clearly bitter because she wants to be called bitter. And sometimes our circumstances and life makes us bitter. We blame God for our misfortune. And in the middle of this misfortune, however, we find Ruth, the Moabitess, did not give up. She could have chosen to go back home, but she didn't. She could have chosen to just look after herself, but she didn't. She chose the narrow path. She chose faithfulness. She could have been very bitter and angry, but she didn't. And so in chapter 2, we find that when they go to Judah, Ruth goes to a relative's field, and this is Boaz's field. And she said she's going to go and collect the remnants of the grain from the harvest. It's barley harvest time, and Ruth goes around in the field just collecting the leftovers. She doesn't ask for food. She doesn't require favor. She doesn't introduce herself and say, "This is who I am. I'm your relative," to Boaz. Because if she had, she probably would have had help. But she was very humble. She chose to be just. She chose to be kind. She chose to be compassionate and stay with Naomi in their time of need and to provide for her. Her vision and purpose in life was not to become famous or rich or acknowledged for what she did or a religiously well-known person. Her priority is her basic life needs and to be faithful and caring to her mother-in-law so she can provide for her. So she puts herself out, going around the field, and as workers are working on the barley harvest, she collects the leftovers that are left on the fields. And for her humility and faithfulness, she's seen and acknowledged by Boaz. You know, when somebody asks for something from us, if we acknowledge that they're in need, we immediately want to give more, don't we? I remember a lady, paper thin, coming to my door once, and doorbell rang and I opened the door and I saw this lady, and she said she lived in the Lighthouse, the Salvation Army home for the homeless, and she asked for money. I didn't feel it was fit to give her money, but she said she was hungry, so I got her some food and just rummaged through my clothes, and I just wanted to be able to give her more. Now, I don't know what she did with what she had, but when somebody looks in need and they ask for it, if we are able to, we feel like we want to be able to give them more than what they ask for. And in her faithfulness and in her humility, as Ruth was going around gathering food for her mother-in-law, Boaz recognized her, acknowledged what she was doing and her faithfulness. He then feeds her. He then gives her extra food. He makes room for her at his table. And as we walk humbly with God in faithfulness, we will find he does exactly the same for us. He will make room for us. He will find a seat at his table and dine with us, sit with us, provide for us. The difficulty is when we are feeling forgotten, when we are going through a difficult time, is understanding that we have a choice, that we do not need to be bitter, that it is our choice to lift our eyes off bitterness and blame on other people, including on God, and look at Jesus' faithfulness and continue to walk in faithfulness and humility with him. I pray that whatever difficulties you may be going through, God will fill you with faith, strength, and perseverance. I pray that faithfulness will be made possible through the help and presence of the Holy Spirit, and that you will find our God of the impossible will not just meet your needs, but lavishly answer your prayers and lavishly provide for you.